It started with a whisper. "He doesn't belong here." Then came the stares, the chuckles, the pity. No one knew his name, and no one cared to ask. But every step he took toward the auction stage, the energy shifted. Because this wasn't just an old man. He was here for one thing, and when he spoke, the room forgot how to breathe. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The sky above Helena, Montana, was a cold wash of steel and cloud, gray and wide, pressing low against the ragged ridges of the land. It was auction day at the Rockridge Pavilion, a place where only the wealthiest of breeders, investors, and elite handlers gathered each fall. Pinewood walls shined with polish, and rows of stadium seating were draped with wool blankets and silk scarves. Somewhere between the smell of straw and the glint of gold belt buckles, the air tasted like competition. At the center of it all stood Valor. He was not just a dog, he was Legacy, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a coat like midnight glass and a composure that made grown men nervous. His ears flicked at the smallest shift in wind. His eyes, amber with threads of steel, moved with intelligence and calm. Bred from the finest rescue bloodlines in the country, Valor had already completed certification trials for avalanche search, missing persons, and advanced scent discrimination. Some whispered he could fetch a record-breaking price, $500,000, maybe more. He stood behind a silver-gated pen near the front of the pavilion. The handlers didn't leash him. He didn't need it. His discipline came from instinct, not fear. People gathered quietly around, staring, calculating, admiring. Even the other dogs, caged and waiting, seemed to grow silent in his presence. Then the room stirred, not because of Valor, but because of a man entering through the rear doors. Harlan Briggs walked with a slow gait, the kind that belonged to someone who had traveled long distances, not in miles, but in years. He wore a tattered barn coat, frayed at the sleeves and heavy with dust. His jeans bore years of use, knees faded, cuffs torn. His boots, cracked and warped, made a dull sound on the wooden floor. On his head sat a wide-brimmed hat, once black, now dulled by time and Montana dust. His beard was thick, silver threaded with iron gray, and his hands, deeply lined and weather-worn, hung like they belonged to a rancher, not a bidder. He didn't speak, didn't look left or right, just walked toward the auction floor as if he had every right to be there. But the room disagreed. A woman in a tailored red coat nudged her friend. "Is he lost?" she murmured. "No," the friend replied with a sneer. "He's confused." A cluster of men in tailored denim and blazers turned their heads in unison, eyes narrowing. One let out a short laugh. Looks like he wandered in off the trail. To them, Harlan wasn't part of this world. This was a place of money, pedigree, and curated prestige. And he, dusty, quiet, poor-looking, was an eyesore, a stain on velvet. But Harlan kept walking, outside. Just beyond the edge of the east stable sat Maggie Lynn, cross-legged on a folded wool blanket, beside a crate of homemade dog collars and hand-packed bags of dry kibble. She was 11, but her eyes were sharper than most adults. Her black curls poked out from a green knit beanie, and her canvas jacket hung loosely on her thin frame. She held a sign written on cardboard with charcoal. Dog treats, $2, leashes. $5, save our kennel. Maggie hadn't been inside the pavilion since her father died. Roy Lynn had run a small dog training center in Helena for over 20 years before the icy roads took him and their family truck one December morning. Since then, Maggie had tried to keep the place alive, feeding the remaining dogs, cleaning kennels, patching fences with rope and prayer. She wasn't supposed to be here, but every auction day she came anyway, hoping. From her spot behind the wooden beam and hay cart, she could see everything, the crowd, the dog pens, and the man in the dust-colored coat walking among polished boots and polished people. He looked like the kind of man her father would have trusted instantly. She didn't know his name, but she watched. The murmur of conversation inside the Rockridge Pavilion deepened into the sharp edges of mockery as Harlan Briggs stood silently beside the sidewall, hands tucked into the pockets of his frayed coat. Dust from his boots lingered in the sunlight slanting across the polished pine floor, dancing like ash on gold. The air had grown colder, not in temperature but in tone. Snickers traveled through the crowd like wind through tall grass, subtle, rustling, and unkind. A man in a hunter-green cashmere blazer and white Stetson gave a low whistle as he leaned toward the woman beside him. His name was Clint Mercer, a retired rodeo rider turned investor in working dogs. He still wore the creases of a cowboy beneath the veneer of his wealth, square shoulders, sun-leathered skin, and a right knee that clicked when he stood too fast. "Look at that old coat," he muttered. "Looks like he dug it out of a barn that caught fire." His companion, Delilah Page, a tall, elegant woman in her 50s with meticulously styled silver hair and a face too still to be natural, laughed behind manicured fingers. She had once owned a line of boutique collars before selling it to a pet conglomerate for millions. "Maybe he thinks they're auctioning sheep," she said, and a few others around them chuckled in response. At the far end of the arena, standing stiffly beneath a banner reading Valor, Lot 22, the auctioneer adjusted his crimson tie and glanced toward the disturbance. He was Howard Greaves, late 60s, with liver-spotted hands and a voice like maple syrup poured over gravel. Slow, rich, worn. He had hosted this auction for over 2 decades, knew every breeder by face, and every bidder by the color of their boots. And yet, this man, this ragged figure. Howard squinted, trying to place him, but the name didn't come. A sharp voice cut through the noise. "Sir, this is your second warning." It was the security officer again, Jones, now with squared shoulders and a firmer tone. He stood taller than Harlan by a good 5 inches. Dark-skinned, clean-shaven, early 30s. His uniform was crisp, badge polished, and demeanor by the book. Not unkind, but firm in the way of someone who'd worked too many long shifts with too little appreciation. "You need to leave before I escort you." Harlan turned to him. Gaze steady, unbothered. "I've got eyes on the dog," he said simply. Jones hesitated, not at the words but at the calmness. There was no sarcasm, no bluff, just stillness. It made the moment awkward, which in turn made it threatening. Jones cleared his throat and stepped slightly back, arms crossing, from her perch outside the pavilion. Maggie Lynn watched through the narrow opening between the barn doors. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she didn't move. Her gloved hands held tight to the small camcorder her father had once used to film obedience lessons in their backyard. Now, it recorded the quiet humiliation of a man she didn't know, but something in her knew this mattered. She didn't know why she pressed record, only that she had to, inside. The chatter shifted as a loud bell chimed, signaling the final sale of the day. Howard Greaves stepped up to the podium, tapping his gavel with practiced weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we now come to our final and most anticipated item. Sotapur 22, Valor, a German shepherd of exceptional pedigree, trained in advanced rescue, tracking, and discipline. Starting bid will begin at $400,000. Gasps rippled. Some had guessed 500,000. 400 was practically generous. A hand shot up. 400. Came a call from a man in a charcoal vest. Another followed, 500. Then 650 from the back. The bids rose quickly. Voices sharper now, filled with adrenaline. The room shifted into a rhythm. Nods, numbers, counters. Howard worked his cadence like a conductor. 700. Do I hear 750? Then came silence. For a heartbeat, no hands moved. And then Harlan lifted one finger. The room didn't react at first. Howard paused. Sir? Harlan's voice rang out. Deep, gravel-rich, unhurried, 1 million. The silence wasn't stunned, it was obliterated. People turned in their seats, heads jerked, someone dropped a coffee cup. Clint Mercer actually laughed aloud, thinking it a joke, then stopped when he saw Harlan's face. No grin, no smugness, just truth. Howard blinked. Did you say 1 million? Harlan repeated, his gaze never leaving Valor, who stood unmoved in his pen, eyes fixed on the crowd as if bored by all of them. Delilah Page exhaled sharply. Who is this man Maggie? Eyes wide, zoomed the lens. Her hands trembled now, more from the weight of the moment than the cold. Jones stepped forward again, his confidence shaken. Sir, unless you can. Howard cut him off. No interruptions during active bidding. A hush returned. No one raised a hand. The bidding was over. 1 million going once. Howard said slowly, going twice, not a whisper, not a cough, not a move. Sold to the gentleman in the back. The gavel fell. The gavel had already fallen, but disbelief clung to the air like wood smoke in winter. Whispers grew louder, forming eddies of doubt that swirled through the Rockridge Pavilion. People who just moments ago had mocked the old man were now squinting, leaning forward, questioning what they thought they knew. $1 million. For a dog. And from him, auctioneer Howard Greaves adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Per auction protocol. Mr. Briggs, we kindly request confirmation of funds before completing the transaction. All eyes turned to Harlan Briggs. He stood still, calm beneath the shifting tension, as if he had walked through this moment before, in another life, another room, another test of whether the world would measure him by his silence or his worth. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his weathered coat and pulled out a folded envelope. It was no thicker than a letter, but the way the room held its breath made it feel like something heavier. He opened it with quiet deliberation and extended it toward the auctioneer. Howard took it cautiously, fingers trembling slightly. He unfolded the check and froze. $1 million. Bank of Montana. Certified, real. Ladies and gentlemen, he said after a long pause, voice rasping with surprise. The check is valid. Mr. Briggs has provided full proof of funds. Gasps, murmurs. A few audible what-s scattered across the pavilion. Then a voice from the front clipped, curious, almost accusing. Wait a minute. Briggs. It came from a middle-aged man in a navy vest and silver tie. Gerald Wyatt, a corporate dog breeder known for patenting canine nutrition supplements. He stood, pointing slightly. Is that Harlan Briggs? Another wave rolled across the crowd, bigger this time. Whispers turned into confirmations, nods, half-remembered headlines, faded magazine covers, lawsuits and lab coats. Delilah Page leaned into Clint Mercer. Didn't he start Biopause, that pet tech company from the early 2000s? Clint nodded slowly, jaw set. Yeah, the one that developed those neural canine trackers. GPS for search and rescue dogs, made a fortune. Then he vanished. Wife died in a car wreck, if I remember right. Just disappeared. Now. The laughter from before curdled into something else. Unease, embarrassment, recognition. Harlan didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood there like a monument the crowd had mistaken for rubble, outside the building, under the pale afternoon light. Maggie Lynn sat cross-legged beside her small stack of unsold leashes and treats. She had been watching everything from a crack in the wooden side gate. Her father's old camcorder still rolling on her lap. She didn't fully understand what biopause was or who Harlan Briggs had been, but the way everyone's tone had shifted told her enough. She replayed the footage, capturing the laughter, the gavel drop, the check. The moment the crowd fell into stunned silence, and then did what her instinct told her to do. She uploaded it. The title was simple. They laughed at a poor man. Until he did this. She linked her shelter's GoFundMe below, the one she had quietly made weeks ago but never shared. Ashamed to ask strangers for help. In the caption, she wrote only, "My name is Maggie Lynn. My dad was Roy Lynn. We're trying to keep his dog shelter alive. This man gave me hope." She didn't expect anything. The video was live. That was enough. But by the next morning, the views were rising faster than she could refresh the page. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Local stations picked up the story, then regional, then national. The mystery billionaire who bought a dog and rescued a girl. From rags to redemption. Harlan Briggs returns. The viral auction video that's saving a small-town shelter. The donations followed. At first, $50, then $500, then more. By the end of the week, Maggie's GoFundMe had passed $120. People wrote messages of support. Former clients of her father reached out. Some remembered the way Roy had trained their anxious dogs, how he never charged those who couldn't pay, and always. They mentioned Harlan. Maggie never got to thank him. He never returned to the shelter. But a small envelope arrived in the mail days later. No name. Just an address in rural Montana. Inside was a note. You don't have to know someone long to know they belong. Keep going. HB. The frost hadn't yet lifted from the grass when Maggie Lynn heard the sound of tires on gravel. It was early, barely past 7, and the sun had only just begun its slow climb over the ridge. Dew clung to the fence posts and the crumbling wooden sign that read Lynn Canine Training, ESTA 1998, its paint flaking like old bark. She rose from the porch steps, rubbing her eyes with gloved hands. Her sweatshirt was 2 sizes too big, layered under a patched denim jacket, and her boots, one mismatched from the other, left soft impressions in the dirt as she stepped toward the sound. A truck was pulling in. An old one, navy blue with rust around the wheel wells and a trailer hitched behind it. It coughed once as it idled, then died gently into silence. The driver stepped out. It was Harlan Briggs. He looked just as he had at the auction, dust-colored coat, hat with a tired brim. Expression unreadable, but something about his posture was different now, less guarded, as if he had set down some invisible burden between then and now. Maggie stood motionless at the gate, unsure whether to smile or salute. He walked up to her and nodded once, like it was the only greeting necessary. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough but warm, like gravel over firewood. "You came," Maggie said, barely above a whisper. "I said I would." He looked past her at the dilapidated barn, its red panels worn gray, the crooked fence line, the kennel run where only 2 dogs remained. Benny, a mutt with half a tail, and Lola, a blind collie who still barked at butterflies. It wasn't much, but it was still standing, I figured, Harlan said. It's easier to build something good where good has already been. Maggie didn't reply. She just opened the gate. From the trailer behind the truck came a low bark. The tailgate creaked down, and out stepped Valor. He moved like liquid steel. Graceful, confident, massive. His coat gleamed in the pale light, and his eyes scanned the property with professional coolness. He sniffed the air, then padded beside Harlan without a leash, as if tethered only by mutual understanding. Maggie dropped her jaw slightly. She had seen the dog before, on screen, in photos, but never this close. He's huge. 2 pounds heavier than the vet wants, Harlan said with a faint smirk. Too many jerky treats. They walked together toward the barn. Maggie pointed out the old training field where her father had once hosted obedience classes. There were still remnants of agility hoops and a collapsed A-frame hidden behind the grass, inside the main room. The table was covered in envelopes, some donations, some letters, and more than a few sketches from children who had seen Maggie's viral video and wanted to draw the brave dogman or the girl with the dog shelter. She had printed and taped a few of them to the wall. The largest was a crayon picture that read in shaky handwriting, "You're never too small to save someone." Harlan ran his fingers along the edge of the table. "You got a lot of people watching now." Maggie nodded. "Some are just curious, but some, they really care." A woman from Michigan sent $10 with a note. Said her son's service dog was trained by my dad 15 years ago. She picked up a letter. She wrote, "He passed away last year, but I never forgot how your dad treated him like he was worth something. Thank you for reminding me." Harlan didn't say anything for a long time. Then he turned toward the back wall, where a black and white photo of Roy Lynn still hung. He was younger in the picture, tall and lanky with messy hair, holding a leash and grinning beside a border collie. He believed dogs were bridges. Maggie said quietly, "Between people, between pain and peace." I think he was right. I think so too, Harlan said. He sat down at the table, folded his hands, and looked her in the eye. I didn't come to drop off money. Maggie blinked. You didn't. No, I came with an offer. Partnership. Long term. Her brows lifted. What kind of partnership? Harlan leaned back slightly. You've got the heart. I've got the history and the reach. Together. We could turn this place into something more than just a kennel, a sanctuary, for dogs that nobody wants, and for people who don't quite fit where they're supposed to. Maggie's voice was thin, like kids who don't talk much, veterans who need quiet, folks on the edge. People like your dad helped, like you still could, and Valor. He gestured toward the dog lying patiently near the door. He'll be the face of it. She stared at him for a moment, unsure if she was dreaming. You'd do that? She asked. I already bought the dog, he said with a shrug. But why me? She asked again. Because, he said slowly, when everyone else laughed. You didn't. Outside, a soft breeze moved across the field, bending the grass and stirring the old wind chime that hadn't made a sound since her father died. It rang twice, soft, clear. Maggie looked down at her hands, then back up. Okay, let's do it. Harlan extended his hand. She reached out and shook it. It wasn't a large handshake. It wasn't even firm, but it held weight, a quiet vow. Valor, as if sensing the moment, rose to his feet and padded between them. He let out a low, approving woof. Then sat down between them like a sentinel watching the dawn of something new. Bao kau kiem tra trunglap. Konko shitiet nau trunglap nguai fam vicho feb. Ka shitiet joak pat trien hopli. Mota shuyen tam kwe herlan. Suswat hien kwe velor tei trei. Tututu kong jong mang. Ka ibat tei hoptak. Valoi jengi saidung trung tamku homoi, tatka jobam sait noyedung tomta jancho. The sun rose slowly over Helena, Montana, casting soft gold across the ridge and bleeding light into the wide clearing behind the newly painted wooden sign. Valor Haven, a sanctuary for dogs and the people who need them. The letters gleamed with fresh varnish, framed by 2 small paw prints and 1 human handprint. Maggie's, pressed into the paint 2 days earlier. The grand opening had drawn more attention than anyone expected. Rows of folding chairs dotted the grass in front of the renovated barn, now painted a deep forest green with white trim. Strings of bulbs swayed in the breeze. Volunteers in matching dark gray t-shirts with the Valor Haven logo passed out dog treats, lemonade, and pamphlets printed on recycled paper. A banner overhead read in bold print, "Welcome home." Everyone, dozens of dogs were scattered throughout the field, rescued mutts, senior retrievers, excitable shepherds, and gentle hounds. They mingled with visitors, licking fingers and rolling in the grass, unaware that today they were the honored guests. Among the first to arrive was Deputy Marianne Ortiz, a sturdy woman in her early 40s with a thick braid of black hair and kind, watchful eyes, known for her stern patrol style but soft heart when it came to strays. She had once quietly paid for surgeries out of her own pocket for dogs hit on back roads. Today, she wore no badge, only jeans, a flannel shirt, and a small brindle pit bull named Momo at her side, who had once been found chained behind a gas station. Marianne waved at Maggie, who stood nervously near the barn doors in a clean blue dress and mismatched socks, her version of formal wear. She looked different now, taller somehow, not physically, but in presence. Her curls were pulled back with a red ribbon, and though her hands still fidgeted, her eyes no longer darted in uncertainty. She belonged here. Beside her stood Harlan Briggs, in his usual dusty coat and the same battered hat he'd worn that day at the auction. He didn't like fuss. He wasn't one for speeches, but Maggie had insisted that he say a few words. After all, none of this would have happened without him. The local news crew was already setting up. Their lead reporter, Jessica Wynn, was in her early 30s, with sharp features and a habit of scribbling everything into her notepad even when the cameras were rolling. She had interviewed senators and ranch hands alike, but this was the first time she'd ever cried while prepping a story. Her cameraman, a lanky teen named Leo, wore headphones around his neck and kept feeding Valor treats between takes. When the microphone was finally clipped to Harlan's collar and the camera's red light blinked on, he didn't look at the lens. He looked at Maggie, then at the dogs running free behind her, then finally to the crowd. "I didn't come here looking for attention," he said, voice steady, even. "I came because I knew what it meant to be judged before you've had the chance to speak. I know what it's like to be overlooked, out of place, underestimated." He paused, letting the wind breathe between sentences. But people, like dogs, often shine brightest when given nothing but kindness and time. You don't always know what someone's capable of until you give them space to prove it. He reached down and ran a calloused hand over Valor's head. "So, I'll say this," he continued, now facing the camera directly. "Don't ever underestimate a person, or a dog." The applause was quiet at first, polite, but it grew, not out of performance, but of gratitude, the kind that came from a town that had almost forgotten how to believe in quiet miracles. After the speeches, Maggie gave tours of the new facility. The once collapsing barn had been turned into a training hall. With rubber flooring and agility equipment, the side stables now held therapy rooms painted with murals, dogs flying airplanes, dogs reading books, dogs riding bikes with kids. It was whimsical, healing, and alive in one corner. A boy with autism named Eli, 8 years old, sat beside a chocolate lab named Teddy, his hand resting gently on the dog's back as he read aloud for the first time in front of others. His mother, Rachel Hart, a petite woman with tired eyes and a heart-shaped pendant around her neck, wept quietly in the doorway. Her husband had left after Eli's diagnosis. She had felt alone for so long. Now, for the first time, she felt like she belonged somewhere, too. Meanwhile, older folks played fetch with retired service dogs under the oak trees. A Vietnam veteran in a wheelchair, Tom Keating, laughed as a border collie dropped a squeaky toy into his lap over and over again, tail wagging like a metronome. And above it all, Maggie stood beside Harlan as Valor roamed freely across the field, stopping to greet children, sniff strollers, and sit proudly beside anyone who called his name. Maggie turned to Harlan. "You're still staying for the fundraiser dinner tonight." "Right, I'll stay long enough to make sure they serve something that isn't kale," he said. She grinned. "Deal?" He adjusted his hat and looked out across the land. "It's yours now," he said. "What has she asked?" "Everything." He replied, "The place, the people, the dogs. I helped you build it. But you're the one they'll follow." She didn't know how to respond, so instead, she reached out and squeezed his hand. He nodded once, then walked toward the edge of the crowd where the trees began, Valor padding beside him like a shadow made of light. That night, under lanterns and laughter, the town danced. Not everyone was in step. Not every moment was perfect. But it was real, and when the stars finally spilled across the sky and the last dog was curled up under a blanket, Maggie stepped outside the barn alone and whispered toward the hills, "Thank you, Dad. We're okay now." And in that stillness, somewhere between the breeze and the bark of a distant pup, it almost sounded like the land answered back. Sometimes, the people and animals the world overlooks are the very ones chosen by God to remind us what love, redemption, and quiet strength truly look like in this story. A forgotten old man, a discarded dog, and a little girl with nothing but faith helped restore not just a shelter, but the belief that miracles still happen when we choose compassion over judgment. Harlan didn't walk into that auction to be seen. He walked in because he believed in something greater, that every life has worth, no matter how broken it looks on the outside. And Maggie, through her hope and courage, showed us that when we lift others up, God often lifts us, too, in our own lives. We may pass by people or animals who seem small, silent, or unwanted. But remember, every soul matters. Sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness, one choice to believe, to turn someone's story into a miracle. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they matter. Comment your thoughts below. And if you believe in second chances, in quiet miracles, and in the power of love, type Amen in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and may God bless you and your family with kindness, healing, and unexpected grace.